Welcome to another episode of the Speak English podcast. I'm David, and with me today is Sarah. How's it going, Sarah?
Hi, David. I'm doing great. Excited for today's topic. We're going to help our listeners stop speaking English like a beginner, right?
Exactly. So, if you've been feeling stuck using basic phrases and want to sound more fluent, today's episode is for you. We're going to share some key phrases that will make your English sound more natural and advanced.
That's right. And the best part is, these phrases are easy to use in everyday conversations. You won't just be learning random vocabulary, you'll actually sound like a more confident English speaker.
So, grab a pen and get ready to take notes, because by the end of this episode, you'll be speaking with more confidence. Let's dive in. So, let's kick things off by talking about the importance of expanding your vocabulary. When you first start learning English, it's easy to rely on basic phrases like, "How are you?" or "What's your name?" But over time, these phrases start to feel repetitive and, honestly, a little boring, don't you think, Sarah?
Absolutely, David. And even though these basic phrases are important for starting conversations, they don't help you stand out or sound fluent. The truth is, in order to sound more natural and confident, you need to be able to use a wider range of words and expressions. It's not just about knowing words, it's about knowing how to use them effectively in different situations.
Exactly. And the best part is that expanding your vocabulary doesn't have to be difficult. You don't need to memorize a huge list of random words. Instead, focus on learning useful phrases that you can use in real-life situations. That's how you'll start sounding like a more advanced speaker. Think about it. When you learn a new phrase and use it in conversation, you're not only expanding your vocabulary, but also improving your ability to communicate.
Right? And there's something special about being able to express yourself in a way that feels natural. If you only know basic phrases, you might feel like you're stuck in a box. But when you start using more varied expressions, you open up a whole new world of communication. People will start to notice how much more fluent and confident you sound. And let's face it, who doesn't want to sound more fluent, right?
Exactly. So today, we're going to share some of the most effective phrases to make you sound more fluent. These phrases are perfect for everyday conversations, and once you start using them, you'll feel much more confident speaking English in any situation.
And these phrases are simple enough that you can start using them right away. There's no need to worry about memorizing complicated words. The goal is to make your English sound more natural, and with just a few simple changes, you'll be amazed at how much better you can communicate. So, let's dive into the first set of phrases.
All right, Sarah, let's talk about those key phrases that will make you sound much more fluent. The first phrase I want to share is, "I'm in a bit of a hurry." This is a fantastic expression to use when you're in a rush, but still want to sound polite. Instead of saying something like, "I don't have time," or "I need to go," which can come off as blunt or rude, this phrase softens the message while still getting your point across. It's perfect for both casual and formal situations.
Exactly, David. And it's super versatile. You can use it in all sorts of scenarios. For example, if you're meeting someone and you need to leave early, you can say, "I'm in a bit of a hurry, but it was nice talking to you." It's polite, and it gives the other person a clear understanding of your situation without making it awkward. Another example could be if you're at work and need to finish something quickly, you can say, "I'm in a bit of a hurry, I'll get back to this later."
I love that example. It's a great way to manage expectations without sounding rushed or impolite. The next phrase we should talk about is "it slipped my mind." This one is really useful when you forget something, but don't want to sound careless or irresponsible. It's a much softer way to admit you forgot something, and it sounds a lot more natural in everyday conversation.
Definitely. It's an expression that's both casual and gentle, which is why it works so well. Imagine you've forgotten an appointment or you didn't respond to someone's message. Instead of saying, "I forgot," you could say, "I'm sorry, it just slipped my mind." It shows that you didn't do it on purpose, and it makes you sound much more considerate.
Right. It adds a level of politeness and understanding. Now, here's another one I think everyone should know. I'm terrible with. This phrase is perfect for situations where you're acknowledging something you struggle with, like directions, numbers, or names. Instead of feeling embarrassed about not being good at something, you can say, I'm terrible with directions, and it makes the conversation flow more naturally.
Exactly, David. It's a great way to laugh at yourself a little and keep things light. For example, if you're meeting new people and can't remember their names, you could say, "I'm terrible with names. Sorry about that." This phrase helps make the situation feel less awkward and keeps the conversation going in a friendly, relaxed way.
I couldn't agree more, Sarah. All of these phrases not only make you sound more fluent, but they also help you sound more natural and approachable. The goal isn't just to sound like you're speaking English. The goal is to sound like a confident, native speaker, and these phrases will help you do just that.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about memorizing these phrases for the sake of it. The key is to use them in context and to practice them regularly. The more you practice, the more these phrases will become second nature, and that's when you'll start sounding like a real pro in English.
Now that we've covered some of the phrases that will help you sound more fluent, let's talk about some common mistakes that learners often make when trying to improve their English. One of the most common mistakes I hear is using I am agree instead of I agree. It seems like a small thing, but it's a mistake many people make. In English, when you agree with something, you don't need the am. You just say, I agree. Simple and direct.
That's a great point, David, and it's one of those mistakes that can make you sound like a beginner. A lot of learners get confused with verb tenses or structures when trying to express agreement. Another common mistake is using I'm boring when you really want to say I'm bored. I'm boring means you think you're dull or uninteresting, while I'm bored means you're not entertained or engaged in the moment. It's a subtle difference, but it's important to get it right.
Exactly, Sarah. And sometimes it's easy to mix them up because both words are related to feelings, but the meaning is completely different. So, if you're sitting in class or at work and feeling uninterested, remember, you're bored, not boring. Another mistake that trips up a lot of learners is using I have 25 years instead of I am 25 years old. In English, we use the verb to be for age, not to have, which is used in many other languages.
Yes, David, that one is so common, especially when you're just starting to speak English. I've heard many people say, I have 30 years, and while it makes sense in some languages, it's not the right structure in English. You need to say, I am 30 years old. It's a small change, but it makes a big difference in how natural your English sounds.
And that brings us to another mistake related to age. Many learners might say, how many years you have, instead of how old are you? It's another situation where the structure is different in English, but once you get the hang of it, it becomes second nature. It's all about practicing these small differences, right, Sarah?
Absolutely, David. These small mistakes can often cause confusion, but with practice, they're easy to correct. And here's a tip. When you make a mistake, don't be afraid to pause and rephrase. It's better to take your time and say it correctly than to rush and risk making the same mistake over and over. In fact, when learners correct their mistakes in real time, it helps them learn much faster.
That's a great point. In fact, mistakes are an essential part of learning a language. Every time you correct yourself, you're improving and reinforcing your knowledge. So, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just make sure you pay attention to them and keep practicing. The more you speak and listen, the fewer mistakes you'll make in the future.
Exactly, David. The key to avoiding these common mistakes is consistency and practice. And once you've mastered these small differences, your English will start sounding much more fluent and natural, just like a native speaker.
Now that we've discussed some of the common mistakes and how to avoid them, let's dive into something that I think is really crucial for mastering English: practice and consistency. You know, Sarah, a lot of learners expect to improve quickly and might get frustrated if they don't see instant results. But the truth is, language learning is a long-term commitment. It's not about learning a few phrases here and there and hoping for the best. It's about constant practice.
You're absolutely right, David. The best way to become fluent is by practicing every day, even if it's just a little bit. Consistency is key. And the great thing about learning a language is that there are so many ways to practice. You can listen to podcasts, watch movies, read books, or even talk to yourself in English. The more you expose yourself to the language, the more natural it will feel. But the key is doing it regularly.
Exactly, Sarah. You know, one of the biggest challenges for learners is finding the time to practice. But honestly, it doesn't have to take hours. Even 10 to 15 minutes a day can make a huge difference. If you practice speaking, listening, or even writing in English every day, you'll see progress. And remember, the more you expose yourself to the language, the easier it becomes to think in English without translating every word in your head.
I agree, David. And you don't have to wait for the perfect moment to start. In fact, some of the best practice happens when you least expect it. Take every opportunity to use English, even if you're just thinking about your day in English or practicing a few phrases while cooking dinner. Every small action counts, and the more you do it, the easier it will feel.
I love that. And don't be afraid to make mistakes along the way. Sometimes, learners worry about speaking because they don't want to sound wrong. But the truth is, making mistakes is a natural part of the process. In fact, the more mistakes you make, the faster you'll learn. It's all part of the journey, and each mistake brings you one step closer to fluency.
Exactly. Mistakes are part of the learning process, and they help you grow. It's important to be patient with yourself and keep pushing forward, even if it feels challenging at times. The key is to stay consistent, practice daily, and trust that over time, you'll see results.
That's a great point, Sarah. And if you can find ways to enjoy the process, whether it's through listening to music in English or chatting with friends online, you'll stay motivated and engaged. The more fun you make learning, the easier it will be to stick with it. And before you know it, you'll be speaking with more confidence and fluency.
So true, David. Learning a language doesn't have to be a chore. With the right mindset and consistent practice, it can be something you look forward to. Just remember, it's all about small, consistent steps. Keep practicing, stay positive, and enjoy the journey.
Moving on, let's talk about something that can really take your English to the next level: expanding your vocabulary. A lot of learners get stuck in a small pool of words that they use over and over again. And while that's totally fine when you're starting out, if you want to sound more natural and fluent, it's important to widen your vocabulary. And the best way to do that is by learning words in context.
Yes, absolutely. Learning new words is not just about memorizing lists of vocabulary. It's about understanding how those words are used in different situations. So, instead of just learning the word happy, for example, try to learn different ways to express happiness, like excited, delighted, or overjoyed. This will give you more options when you speak and help you sound more fluent.
Exactly, Sarah. And one of the best ways to learn vocabulary in context is by exposing yourself to real-world situations. Watch movies, listen to podcasts, or read articles in English. Pay attention to how native speakers use words in different contexts. You'll start to notice patterns and get a better feel for how to use these words naturally.
I love that idea, David. And another great way to expand your vocabulary is through conversations. Don't be afraid to ask native speakers or advanced learners about words you don't understand. It's a great opportunity to learn new phrases and expressions, and you can use them in your next conversation. Plus, when you learn new words, try to use them right away to make them stick.
That's a great point, Sarah. It's all about using new words as much as possible to make them part of your active vocabulary. And don't just learn single words. Try to learn phrases or even sentences. This helps you understand how the words fit into the structure of the language and gives you more confidence when speaking.
Exactly, David. And don't forget to review regularly. It's easy to forget new words, especially if you don't use them often. But with regular practice and review, those words will become part of your long-term memory. You can create flashcards, use language apps, or even make a list of new words you learn each week. The goal is to keep adding to your vocabulary little by little.
Right. And I think something that a lot of learners overlook is the importance of using the words they learn in real conversations. You can study all day long, but unless you're actively using those words in context, they won't stick. So, try to find opportunities to practice speaking, even if it's with yourself or through language exchanges.
Exactly, David. The key is to practice, and don't be afraid to use your new vocabulary, even if you're not 100% sure you're using it perfectly. The more you use it, the better you'll get, and over time, it will start to feel more natural.
Now, let's dive into one of the most important aspects of speaking English: building confidence. Many learners are afraid to speak because they worry about making mistakes or not sounding perfect. But the truth is, making mistakes is a part of the learning process, and the more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
Exactly! Confidence is key, David. And one thing that really helps with confidence is understanding that English, like any other language, is a skill that improves with time. The more you practice, the better you get. It's not about being perfect. It's about making progress and not letting fear hold you back from speaking.
That's a great point, Sarah. And here's something that I always tell my students. Focus on communicating, not on speaking perfectly. Sometimes learners get so caught up in trying to use the perfect grammar or vocabulary that they forget the goal is to express themselves. So even if you make a mistake, the important thing is that you got your message across.
Yes. And another great way to build confidence is by practicing speaking in low-pressure situations. For example, you can start by speaking with a friend or language partner who understands that you're learning and won't judge you. This way, you can practice without feeling nervous.
Absolutely, Sarah. And don't underestimate the power of speaking out loud to yourself. You can practice speaking about your day, describe things around you, or even talk about your thoughts. Doing this helps you get used to producing English in a relaxed, low-stress environment. It's all about getting comfortable with speaking and not worrying too much about making mistakes.
And don't forget, David, that speaking naturally isn't just about grammar or vocabulary. It's also about rhythm and intonation. One way to sound more natural is by listening to native speakers and trying to mimic their rhythm. Notice how they stress certain words and how their tone changes depending on the situation. This will help you sound more fluent and natural when you speak.
Exactly. And the more you expose yourself to English, whether it's through movies, podcasts, or conversations, the more you'll pick up on these little nuances that make speech sound natural. And over time, this will help you speak with more confidence and ease.
And one last tip for building confidence is to set small, achievable goals. Don't try to tackle everything at once. Start by setting a goal to have a short conversation in English each week, or to learn a certain number of new words. When you reach those goals, it'll give you a sense of accomplishment and motivate you to keep going.
In this chapter, we're going to talk about mastering common phrases and expressions that will help you sound more fluent and natural in your conversations. These phrases are used by native speakers every day, and once you learn them, they can make a huge difference in how you communicate.
Absolutely, David. It's not just about knowing vocabulary or grammar. It's about using the right phrases at the right time. For example, Instead of always saying hello when you greet someone, you can use phrases like "What's up?" or "How's it going?" These are informal and more natural ways of greeting people.
Exactly, Sarah. And another great phrase to learn is "I'm looking forward to." For example, "I'm looking forward to meeting you," or "I'm looking forward to the weekend." This phrase helps you express excitement or anticipation, and it's commonly used by native speakers.
That's a good one, David. Another useful phrase is "It's up to you." This is a great way to give someone the choice or responsibility to make a decision. For example, do you want to go to the movies? It's up to you. It's simple, but it's very commonly used in everyday English.
And don't forget about "I mean." This is a phrase you can use when you're explaining or clarifying something. For example, "I love going to the beach." I mean, who doesn't? It's a casual way to add more meaning or emphasis to what you're saying.
Yes! And one of my favorite phrases is, "I've had enough." This is a great way to express that you're tired of something or that you've reached your limit. For example, "I've had enough of this rain," or "I've had enough of waiting." It's another very natural way to communicate feelings.
All these phrases are essential for sounding more like a native speaker. But here's the thing. Learning them is just the first step. The key is to use them in your daily conversations. The more you practice, the more these phrases will become a natural part of your vocabulary.
That's right. And remember, David, that it's not about memorizing every phrase out there. It's about choosing the ones that fit your personal style and the situations you find yourself in most often. So, start with a few and gradually add more to your vocabulary as you go.
Exactly, Sarah. And to wrap this up, don't be afraid to experiment with these phrases in your conversations. Native speakers use them all the time, and the more you use them, the more comfortable and confident you'll become in speaking English naturally. Now let's dive into a topic that often confuses learners of English: phrasal verbs. These are phrases made up of a verb and one or two particles, like prepositions or adverbs. The meaning of a phrasal verb is often different from the meaning of the individual words on their own, which can make them tricky to understand at first.
That's right, David. But don't worry. Once you get the hang of phrasal verbs, they can really boost your fluency. For example, if someone says, "I need to pick up the phone," they're not saying they're going to physically pick the phone up from the ground, but rather answer it.
Exactly. And another common phrasal verb is turn on. We use it when we start something, like a device or appliance. For example, "Can you turn on the TV?" Or, "Don't forget to turn on the lights before you leave." It's a simple action, but it's essential to learn these phrases.
Yes, and another great phrasal verb is look after. This means to take care of someone or something. For instance, "I'm going to look after my little brother while my parents are out." Or, "Can you look after the dog while I'm away?" It's an important one to know.
Great examples, Sarah. Another phrasal verb that comes up a lot is get along. It means to have a good relationship with someone. For example, "Do you get along with your coworkers?" Or, "My siblings get along really well." It's something native speakers use all the time.
And don't forget about give up. This is a phrase that means to quit or stop doing something. For example, "I almost gave up on learning English, but I kept going." Or, "She gave up on her dream of becoming a singer." It's a very expressive phrasal verb.
The tricky thing about phrasal verbs is that some of them can have multiple meanings. For example, take off can mean to remove something, like take off your jacket, or it can mean to become successful, like her business really took off. It all depends on the context.
Exactly. And the best way to get comfortable with phrasal verbs is to practice them in context. Start by learning a few of the most common ones and use them in sentences every day. The more you use them, the more natural they'll feel.
That's right, Sarah. Just remember that phrasal verbs are a key part of sounding more natural in English. Don't be intimidated by them. With practice, they'll become second nature, and you'll start using them without even thinking about it. Now, let's take a look at idioms. These are phrases that have a meaning that's different from the individual words in the phrase. Idioms are a huge part of everyday English, and if you want to sound more natural, you've got to learn how to use them.
Exactly, David. Idioms are expressions that native speakers use all the time, and they add a lot of color to the language. For instance, when someone says, "It's a piece of cake," they're not talking about actual cake, but rather that something is very easy.
That's a great example. Another idiom that you'll hear often is break the ice. This means to do or say something to make people feel more comfortable in a social situation. For example, I tried to break the ice with a joke, and everyone started laughing.
Yes. And what about the ball is in your court? This means that it's your turn to take action or make a decision. For example, I've done everything I can to help. Now the ball is in your court.
Good one. And under the weather is another popular idiom. It means that you're not feeling well. You might say, "I'm feeling a bit under the weather today, so I'm going to stay home and rest."
Exactly, David. Idioms can be tricky because their meanings are not always obvious. For example, burning the midnight oil means staying up late working or studying. So if you hear someone say, "I had to burn the midnight oil to finish the project," now you'll know what they mean.
Idioms are one of those things that make English so interesting. There are thousands of idioms out there, and while it's impossible to learn them all, focusing on the most common ones is a good way to start. This will help you understand native speakers and use these expressions in your own conversations.
And the great thing about idioms is that they're not just for speaking. They're also used in writing. So, once you get familiar with a few, you can begin incorporating them into your texts or emails to sound more natural.
Definitely. One important tip is not to overuse idioms. You want to use them naturally, just like a native speaker would. The key is to practice and get comfortable with them. The more you use them, the easier it will be to incorporate them into your speech.
That's right. So don't be afraid to experiment with idioms. Try using them in your daily conversations, and soon enough, they'll become second nature to you. They'll help you sound more fluent and confident in English.
So, to wrap things up, we've covered a lot today. We've explored essential phrases that can help you sound more fluent, from everyday expressions to more complex ones like idioms.
Absolutely, David. Learning these phrases is key to improving your English, and it's not about memorizing a list. It's about using them in real conversations, just like we showed you today. The more you practice, the more natural it will feel.
That's right. And remember, fluency doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, but every small step counts. By incorporating these phrases into your conversations, you're making huge progress.
And as we mentioned earlier, don't be afraid to experiment with new phrases. Native speakers use idioms and expressions all the time, and now you're one step closer to sounding just like them.
Exactly. To help you along the way, try setting small goals, like learning one new phrase a day. Then, challenge yourself to use that phrase in your conversations throughout the week. It's a fun and easy way to stay motivated.
And of course, keep listening to content like this, practicing your speaking skills, and, most importantly, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mistakes are part of the learning process, and they help you grow.
Great point, Sarah. And we'll be back with more tips to help you on your journey to mastering English. Remember, the key is consistency, so keep practicing and keep pushing yourself.
That's right. So thanks for tuning in, and we hope today's episode has given you some valuable tools to sound more fluent and confident in English. Until next time, keep learning and keep improving.
See you next time, everyone. Take care and keep speaking English with confidence.